Good morning. We're glad that you have joined us for our Bible class this morning. If you would, while everyone's getting settled, if you would open your Bibles or devices to Luke chapter 13. Luke chapter 13. As many of you know, we're studying the life of Christ this quarter and the parallel versions that are found in the Gospels. However, for expediency's sake, today we're going to spend most of our time in the book of Luke, chapters 13 and 14. Before we begin, I have a question for you. How healthy are you? Are you very healthy? Okay, I see lots of heads shaking yes. Would your doctor agree with you? How about your wife or husband or children? How about your coworkers? How about your neighbors? How about somebody you've never met that comes up and sees you and interacts with you for a bit? How healthy would they say you are? Who sets the standard? Who says what healthy is? Insurance companies. Okay. How about that little chart? Have you ever seen that little chart, that height and weight chart? Has anybody ever been okay on that height and weight chart? You're either underweight or overweight. I've never found anybody that said, I am the picture of health based on that chart. Well, you know, lots of people will tell us whether we're healthy or not, won't they? They'll tell us what they think. They'll tell us what the standard is. But let's take it to a different slant. How spiritually healthy are you? Would most of us say we're here? We're here at 9 o'clock. That's a pretty good sign that I'm spiritually healthy. Somebody might say, well, I'm here every time they open the doors. I help in the fellowships. I do the door knocking. I do all of these things. I think I'm pretty healthy. And that may be true. But who sets the standard for what constitutes spiritual health? Who says what constitutes spiritual health? I see some people putting thumbs up and some people fingers up and some people putting Bibles up. So God sets the standards, doesn't he? But is that always been the case that we all agree with that standard? Just like our physical health, do we agree who gets to set the standard of what our spiritual health or physical health is? When you think about it, ever since the beginning, think back to Genesis chapter 3. And when Satan tempted Eve, what did he tell her? He said, for when you eat of it, you will, what? Be like God. Now, I've thought about this week, and I just want to throw this out and see what you think. And I will state, this is just my opinion. But I got to thinking about that. What was the real temptation there? Was it really just the knowledge of good and evil that they were tempted with? That they really just wanted to be able to know, okay, this is good, this is evil, this is right, this is wrong. I should do this, I shouldn't do that. Just that knowledge, is that what Satan was offering them for eating the fruit? Or what was it that they wanted to be like God in getting to choose what was right and what was wrong? To be an arbiter of what is morally right and morally wrong. To be able to set the standards for themselves. What constitutes what's right for me and what's wrong for me. What do you think? Do you think that's what Satan was really offering man? is self-determination. Just look up sometime in the dictionary how many words start with the pronoun self. Self-determination, self-governing, self-actualization. What was that? Selfish. Self-assurance. I'm sorry? Self-destruction. But those are the words we don't like to look at, is it? We like to look, self-control. That's one of the things, if you take some of these programs, they want to tell you how to maximize yourself. Be the best you can be. Be the one in control. There was a book out many years ago, Looking Out for Number, and who was number one? Me. Okay? If I'm number one, what does that make you? Less than. What does that make God? Less than. Do you remember also a few years ago there was bumper stickers that were very, very popular that says, God is my co-pilot. Who does that mean is in charge? Who's the commander of the aircraft? We have a few Air Force people here. If God's the co-pilot, who's the commander? Self, the pilot. The man in is it the left seat or the right? I can't ever remember that. But the pilot's in control. We want to be in charge. We want to determine what's right and wrong for ourselves. And that's what Satan has offered man since the garden. And we're going to see that crop up here again, generations later. And yet, even now, what is in our culture, what is our culture telling us to do? You can't tell me what's right. What is right for me is right for me. I'm the only one who could determine that. And so even in our culture today, we have to fight that. We have to fight the idea that we determine morality. We determine what the standard should be. Let's open our book, our Bible, to Luke 13, beginning with verse 22. And let's begin reading at verse 22. He went on his way through the towns and villages teaching and journeying toward Jerusalem. And someone said to him, Lord, will those who are saved be few? And he said to them, strive to enter by the narrow door, for many, I tell you, will seek to enter and not be able to. When once the householder has risen up and shut the door, you will begin to stand outside and to knock at the door, saying, Lord, open to us. He will answer you, I do not know where you come from. Then you will begin to say, well, we ate and drank in your presence, and you taught in our streets. But he will say, I tell you, I do not know where you come from. Depart from me, all you workers of iniquity. There you will weep and gnash your teeth when you see Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets of the kingdom of God, and you yourselves will be thrust out. And men will come from the east and west and from the north and the south and sit at the table of the kingdom of God. And behold, some of the last who will be first, and some who are first will be last. Jesus is now beginning what's known as his Parian Ministry. This is where he has been working in Judea, he's been working in Galilee, and he's been rejected. He's been basically run out of town because of the Pharisees and the Jews that are pursuing him and continuing to try to trap him. And over and over again, he told them, it's not my time yet. It wasn't his time to be crucified. And so he moves his ministry across the Jordan into Perea. But he's always mindful that he's on his way to Jerusalem. What does Jerusalem hold for him? Why is he looking forward to Jerusalem? It's not pleasant, but why would he look forward to it? Why is he always pointing toward Jerusalem?
Because that's the tangible
That's when? That's what he came for. That is the fulfillment of the promise of God. That is the point to where men can be saved. That is where hope begins. And without that moment in Jerusalem, there is no hope for mankind. And so no matter what Jesus was doing or where he was at, his mindset was always to go toward Jerusalem. He was working, we read in John chapter 10, verses 40 to 42, that this is the same area that John the Baptist had been teaching in. And so he's going into an area where people have heard about the kingdom coming. This is the area where he was baptized in by John the Baptist. And so some of the people there knew of Jesus and knew what John was teaching about him. But one of the unique things, and sometime if you'd like to turn over to John 10 and just look at this, one of the things it said is John did not perform miracles. Did y'all know that? That John's teaching was strictly teaching. He didn't back up his teaching with signs and wonders. That was left for Jesus to do when he moved into this area. And so he's moving into Perea, the same area that John had prepared for him. When he's moving into this area, he's still being followed and hounded by the Pharisees and the leaders of the Jews. And one of them comes up to him and says, "Lord, will those who are saved be few?" Why do you think he asked? We never see in Scripture anywhere else that question had been asked. Why would one of the Pharisees come up and say, "Will the saved be few?" No idea. Okay, I had to look this up myself, so I'm glad I wasn't alone. What I found out, this was a hot topic among the Jewish leaders. There were two primary sects in the Jews among the leaders. Does anybody remember what they were? Pharisees and Sadducees. They had very differing views on end times, didn't they? And so this was a very popular discussion point with rabbis in synagogues about who was going to be saved. And so they would argue whether is God going to save the entire Jewish nation, or is God only going to save some of the Jewish nation? So this was a topic that they had even back then. Don't we have that still today? I remember when I was a kid, people come up and you'd say, "Where do you attend?" And I'd say, "I'll go to the Church of Christ." And, "Oh, you're the ones that think you're the only ones going to be saved." So even today, that topic goes on. But this was a big topic with rabbis. And it could be that this person, whoever was that asked the question, wanted to know if Jesus was on his side, if Jesus agreed with him, if Jesus agreed with his particular group. Or it could be that he was of an opposing group and they were looking to trap Jesus on this. And so he's saying, "Okay, teacher, give us your opinion. Is many going to be saved, or is it going to be few?" And does Jesus answer his question the way he expects? How often did Jesus answer questions the way we expect? Not very often. When Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" what did Jesus answer? You said it. Many times Jesus gives answers that cause us to think, that cause us to try to understand what his point is. And he does the same thing here when he says to him, "Strive to enter by the narrow door, for many, I tell you, will seek to enter and will not be able." The word strive there is an interesting word, because when you look at the original Greek word there is the same word that is formed in English as agony. He's saying, agonize to enter the narrow door. Going through a narrow door is a lot more difficult. If everybody in the congregation had to get through this one single door up here in time to make it to the cafeteria on time, How well would that process go? It'd be a little difficult, wouldn't it? Because the door is narrow. It's single, and there are many of us. And so Jesus is saying that the way that into the kingdom is a difficult one. It's not one that is easily... I'm sorry? Correct. And that way is limited. It doesn't allow for my opinion, does it? It doesn't allow for my choice of morality. It only follows the way of the Lord. And so Jesus is saying that the way is narrow and it's difficult. And he's also saying here when he says, I tell you, many will seek to enter and not be able. When the householder has risen up and shut the door, you will begin to stand outside and knock at the door, saying, Lord, open to us. And he will answer to you, I do not know where you come from. Then you will begin to say, we ate and drank in your presence, and you taught in our streets. What are they claiming to the man of the household? You know us. We've listened to you teach. We've eaten and drank in your presence. We're friends. We're buddies. And what does the householder say? I don't know who you are. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23, we find a similar statement when Jesus said, not everyone who says unto me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but who? He who does the will of my Father. And many will claim to say, didn't I cast out demons in your name? Didn't I perform many wonderful acts? Didn't I do this? Didn't I do that? Didn't I do the visitation program? Didn't I tithe? Didn't I give more than my tithe? Didn't I do all these many wonderful things in your name? And it says, Jesus said, I never knew you. So what Jesus is saying here is true, that there are going to be people who they expect to enter the reward, and they're not going to be able to. It's not their own acts that justify them, but, as Vernon said, by following the word of the Lord. And so, not only is the way narrow and difficult, there are many people who, by trying to earn their way into heaven by their works. Another passage we're very familiar with is 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not love, I am nothing but a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. I'm a noisemaker. That's all and if I give all my money to the poor and I give my body to be burned, I sacrifice, I martyr myself, and have not love, I am nothing. And so the second point of Jesus' story here is, just because you do works, you're not going to earn your way into heaven. You're not going to earn your way into a relationship with God. He's going to turn them away and say, I never knew you. And then he makes a very, very radical statement when he follows it up with this. And some men will come from the east and west and from the north and south and sit at the table of the kingdom of God. And behold, some who are last will be first, and some of the first will be the last. What is Jesus making? What statement is he making with this? It's a little bit of prophecy. What is he prophesying? It's not only going to be the Jews. There are Gentiles that are going to be saved. And this was a concept that was just inconceivable to many of the Jews. They thought the kingdom was theirs exclusively, and that there was no possible way for the Gentiles to be saved. And so Jesus has made this just radical statement that the way to the kingdom is hard, it's difficult, and many are people that think they're going to make it or not, And not only that, many of the people you thought would never be there are going to be there. And so Jesus is continuing to question them and to make them think about what they think about the will of God is and what the end times are going to be like. One of the most important points here is Jesus wanted the questioner to not be concerned with who will be saved, but rather to be focused on if he would be saved. Isn't that what Jesus is asking all of us? Just as we talk about here, and we're going to talk about it more following this, the Pharisees and Jews were always trying to trap Jesus and trap others and tell everybody else what they were doing wrong. And this man comes up and he's wanting to do the same thing. How many people are going to be saved? Jesus is saying, don't worry about the number. Don't worry about your brother. Don't worry about your sister. Worry about, are you going to be saved? That's the question you need to be most concerned about. And so the Pharisees follow up, and let's begin reading verse 31. At that very same hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." And he said to them, "Go and tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I finish my course. Nevertheless, I must go on my way today and tomorrow and the day following, for it cannot be that a prophet should perish away from Jerusalem. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, killing the prophets and stoning those who are sent to you, how often I would have gathered your children as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not. Behold, your house is forsaken, and I tell you, you will not see me until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." The Pharisees come up to him, and are they so concerned about his well-being that they're giving him a warning? Run away, Herod's coming, he's looking for you. Is that what the Pharisees are doing? I'm sorry?
I think they're in his face saying, we're going to kill you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Okay. They are not concerned about his well-being at all, because they are the true threat. Isn't that correct? What part did Herod have in the crucifixion of Jesus? Very little. Very little, if any. What part did the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders have in the crucifixion of Jesus? So the threat was really from them, not from Herod. But Herod was interested in this, but he was interested in it for self-preservation. Because, see, Herod was a puppet king set up by the Roman Empire on one condition: you control the Jews. Don't make me come down there. And so Herod was a puppet king determined to keep order. And if Jesus was going to cause any political unrest, it could cost Herod his position, his power, his wealth, and possibly even his life. So Herod's concern was that there just be peace, that no one stir up trouble that was going to cause trouble for him. But the Pharisees had very different motivations. They wanted Jesus because he threatened their position. He threatened their authority. He threatened their status. He threatened everything that they thought was important. And so they come to Jesus and they basically saying, "Get out of Dodge. We don't want you here. Basically, I don't want you in our town because you are threatening my way of life." And so Jesus is saying, well, no, see, I have plans today, and I have plans tomorrow, and I have plans the day after that. And so what Herod does is not going to determine what I do. And he tells him, and I'm going to do this and that the next day. And what you're planning is not going to threaten that. Because I know you're trying to kill me, and a prophet cannot be killed outside of Jerusalem. Why do you think he said that? Is it true a prophet couldn't be killed outside of Jerusalem? Exactly. He is reminding them it's the Jews who kill the prophets. It's the Jewish leaders who kill and slay the prophets. He said, you are the danger, not Herod. And someday you are going to see me and say, blessed is he, is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Isn't that true for all of us, no matter where we stand on God? Doesn't the Bible say, in the end, when Jesus comes again, every knee will bow and acknowledge him as Lord? And so he moves on. They continue to follow him. One Sabbath, and beginning in chapter 14, he went to dine at the house of the ruler of the Pharisees. They were watching him carefully. This is the third time that Jesus has gone home to eat with one of the leading Pharisees. And here it says a ruler of the Pharisees. And they were watching him carefully. Do you think Jesus didn't know that? Of course he knew what they were planning. He knew their hearts. He knew their motivations. He knew their mindset. And they were watching him carefully. And so it says, behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. Do you think this is by accident? What day of the week is this? The Sabbath day. Okay. And what did the Pharisees confronted Jesus the other two times he was at a Pharisee's home? For healing on the Sabbath. And so at this house on the Sabbath day, there just happens to be a man that has a disease that the doctors at that time couldn't cure. What was dropsy? Does anybody know what that disease was? Okay. I looked it up. It's what we would call edema. Carrying on fluids, uncontrollable carrying of the legs and feet would swell, the lower extremity would swell. It could cause what we know of as congestive heart failure because retaining excess fluids. And so this is the condition of the man that was brought to him. It was a setup. How many times have the Pharisees tried to set Jesus up? Can you think of another occasion? The woman caught in adultery. They just happened to find a woman caught in adultery to bring to Jesus and to see what he was going to do. So this is the third time that they've confronted him in the house of a Pharisee, a leader of the Pharisees, with a way to try to cause something to be a law to be broken, something that they could claim was blasphemy, which was under Jewish law punishable by death. And so they're trying to trap them. But Jesus finds this to be a teachable moment. Have you ever had teachable moments with anybody? Your children, maybe a coworker, your husband? Have you ever found a moment when a situation comes up and where you can take that and make an illustration to make a point? Jesus uses this occasion where they are ready to trap him, and he uses it as a teachable moment. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day or not?" But they remained silent. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he turned to them and said, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" And they could not reply to these things. They could not or would not. How is it that they could not?
They could not refute his position as far as the question that he asked of them.
Because what would they have to answer if they answered?
Well, of course we would do that.
Of course we would do that. And basically they would back the position and what Jesus had done. And what he is trying to say is, isn't this man and his suffering more value than an ox. If you would save an ox, you would save your son. Why shouldn't I save a child of God? Why shouldn't I help him in his condition? And they had no reply. So here goes his teachable moment. Now he tells a parable to those who were invited. This is to the Pharisees' house. When he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them. Now, Jesus was at a feast. He had been invited to a big supper at this Pharisee's house. And he says, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by them. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. That's what we call the walk of shame. Have you ever observed that where somebody was asked to move? I remember one time I went to a service and I didn't see the reserve sign on one end and I sat down at the other and they asked me to move back, and so I took the walk of shame. And so I know that feeling of being asked to move. It says, but rather when you are invited, go sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Here again, he's trying to teach the Pharisees about their mindset, mindset that they are better than anyone else. You remember the statement that he made in chapter 13, some who are the first will be last, and some of the last will be first. Again, he's trying to teach them the idea of humility, of rather than exalting themselves, waiting to be exalted. When Jesus told us, seek first the kingdom of heaven, and what? All these things will be added to you. If we seek God's interest first, we will be honored and exalted by him, and we don't have to self-exalt ourselves. And so then he goes on to tell another parable. He tells 3 parables about banquets or feasts. He's at a feast, and so he's using this teachable moment and say, I'm going to tell you about feasts. Let's talk about feasts. Here's the second. He also said to a man who invited him, when you give a dinner or banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because why? They cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Who is repayment going to come from? The repayment comes from God. Is that the standard practice in our culture? I mean, if I have Milton and Judy over to our house for a nice dinner, I get my Weber grill out and cook a thick steak, what's kind of unspoken expectation? That invitation is going to be returned. At some point, they're going to have something, and they're going to try to cook something better than my steak. And then we go back and forth. It's like a ping pong match, isn't it? We just try to invite each other and to top each other. But he says that's not what this is about, is to treat people that can treat you better. He says treat people who can give you nothing. To help people that you have no reason to. There's no repayment that you can expect back from them. Isn't that what the Good Samaritan did? What right of expectation of repayment could he expect from the injured man? None. In fact, the only promise of repayment was made to who? The innkeeper. And who said he was going to repay? The Samaritan. He said, if you incur any more expenses caring for this, I'll come back and repay you. The Good Samaritan expected nothing in repayment. Jesus again is teaching the idea of lose your expectation when you help other people. Give because you have been given to, not because the person can give back to you. And then he goes on. When one of those who reclined at the table with him heard these things, he said, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread at the kingdom of God." But he said to him, "A man once had a great banquet and invited many, and at that time for the banquet he sent a servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for now everything is ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I brought a field and I must go to see it. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame.' And the servant said, 'Sir, what you have commanded has been done, and yet still there is room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go out to the highways and the hedges and compel the people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of the men and women who are invited will taste my banquet.'" Jesus is talking about the invitation of God, isn't he? How God has prepared a wonderful place for us, a place beyond anything that we could ever imagine. And he's talking about living up to our commitments, isn't he? How many times have we made a commitment to someone that we get what we would consider to be a better offer, and we're tempted to make excuses to our first commitment? Well, I can't come. This came up or that came up, and it's easy to make excuses. I think I got an A in this class of excuse making. I can come up with some good ones. My mother told me I should be a lawyer when I was growing up, because I could make excuses with the best. That's what Jesus is talking about here, is people find excuses for not living up to their commitment to the Lord. What are some excuses that people in our culture could make for not serving the Lord? I'm too busy. I'm too busy. I mean, I've got, what kind of things would make us too busy? I've got work. I got work hours. When work lets up, then I can come. Or what else? Family. I've got to chase my kids. Have any of y'all had to chase kids and play taxi driver and take them to all of their events? I'm too busy with my kids. When my kids are grown or they're able to take care of themselves, then I will commit. What other excuses? Betsy?
You hear a lot, people don't want to get involved with the church or the church people and do things because those people are just a bunch of hypocrites. They're not any better than I am. And I've heard that any number of times. That's why they just don't want to get involved with the church.
Okay. She said some people have said that they don't want to get involved with the church because the church is full of hypocrites. I heard a statement not too long ago I thought was a pretty clever response. Somebody said, "Okay, so you don't want to go to church." Now, everybody in the church is not a hypocrite. Wouldn't you agree? I said, "Well, yeah, there's a few people that are not." Okay, so you don't want to go to church and spend time with a few hypocrites, so you're going to spend eternity with all of them.
But it's meant to
Exactly. When excuses have to be examined, a lot of times they don't stand up under examination. If we had to put our excuses on the stand and get cross-examined, they wouldn't hold up very well, would they? But that's a perfect example. But that very point about the hypocrites takes us back to one of the first points that we made in this, when the man asked, how many are going to be saved? What was Jesus' response? Worry about whether you are going to be saved. Don't worry about your brother or sister. That was the whole point of the judge not, that be not judged. And when we talked about in the beginning about spiritual health or physical health, we need to worry about our own condition, not be worried about what someone else's is, and trying to determine for them what they need to be doing.
And I think that doesn't mean we should not have care and concern for others, but it's Jesus told us, get the telephone pole out of our own
Right.
first, and then we can see better to help someone else. So get your own act together first.
Absolutely. You're setting an example for them before you go to them by making sure you're taking care of yourself. Then you go to them. Roger?
I think there's an indictment here also against us today, in the sense that the people that that finally were invited to the feast were the blind and the crippled and the lame. Is that who we're invited? Are we going out to the poor and telling them about Jesus? We're doing like what you said about whenever you invite somebody to dinner. We're inviting those who are like us. And I think that's
How welcome do we make them feel when they come? Do we accept, or do we make them feel like they should leave?
or do we go out and seek them?
Exactly. The last point I want to make is verses 25 to 33. I'm not going to take time to read them because our time is up, but I think this point is very, very powerful. Verse 27, verse 25 to 33, Jesus is telling you how you can't be my disciple. If you were to read this as a job description, you would think, why would I want to do that? If they told you, you get no time off, you have to give your pay to the United Way every payday, you work hours, we don't give any benefits, we don't give you time for a lunch break, do you want the job? Jesus is telling them the cost of discipleship here. And he says, unless you're willing to do this, you cannot be my disciple. There was a verse in verse 27, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. This week I had a kind of a revelation about that. When he said, who does not bear my cross, they knew exactly what he was talking about. They had seen people crucified. I mean, Jesus wasn't the first crucifixion. They had many, many crucifixions. They were done on public roads. They were done in many ways to show an example of what happened if you defied the law. And he is trying to show them that coming to Jesus takes commitment. It takes dedication. It's not easy. There is a cost. But what do we find is the result of this? Many people came to Jesus. Many people love to be challenged. They love to find out exactly what is required and to do that. And so many people, we find in later chapters, many people followed Jesus as a result of this teaching. They heard the cost and were willing to pay it. Thank you.